Ethan Cole was used to silence, the kind that settled in a woodshop long after the last hammer fell, the kind that wrapped around him in the early morning before the city began to stir. His workshop sat wedged between a shuttered laundromat and a cracked brick grocery, nestled in the worn-down heart of a neighborhood the world had long stopped noticing. It smelled of cedar and turpentine, lined with shelves of sandpapered memory. For Ethan, every chair, every table, every carved beam was a way to steady a world that once shattered beneath his feet. Then, one Tuesday morning, she walked in, dragging behind her a chair that looked like it had lived through 100 years and 3 wars. She wore no makeup, no fancy clothes, just jeans cuffed at the ankles, a gray cardigan too big for her frame, and a look in her eyes that said she was both curious and quietly guarded. "Hi," she said. "I was told you fix things that don't look fixable." Ethan looked at the chair, then at her. "Depends. Is it sentimental or just old?" She smiled, the corner of her mouth twitching upward like a secret barely told. "Both." He stepped closer, brushing his fingers along the armrest. "Victorian, walnut frame, hand-carved. Someone loved this chair?" She nodded. "It was my mother's. She used to sit in it every evening with a book." He didn't ask anything else. He just said, "Give me a week." Over the next few days, she returned. Not to check on the chair, she said, she trusted him, but to talk. Sometimes with coffee, sometimes with silence. Her name was Clara Dean, or so she said. She claimed to work part-time at a bookstore across town, and she liked asking him questions about the smell of pine wood, about how long it took to hand-lay the table leg, about why he never left the neighborhood. Ethan was not a man who gave himself easily, but there was something about the way she listened that made him want to answer. "People leave this place when they want to forget where they came from," he once said. "I stay because I don't want to." She didn't press, just nodded. One afternoon, it rained harder than the forecast predicted. Clara showed up, soaked, hair clinging to her face, hugging a bag of pastries. "Peace offering," she grinned. "For what?" he asked. "For interrupting whatever quiet thing you were doing before I barged in." They sat in the back corner of the shop, steam rising from their coffee cups as rain lashed the windows. That was the first time he told her about his father, how the man fought for their home until he couldn't anymore, how a corporation took their land and left them with nothing but court papers and grief. Clara listened, face unreadable. Inside, her heart twisted, but her secret stayed behind her lips. The chair was finished by Friday, restored, polished, reborn. "It's beautiful," Clara whispered, running her hands along the smooth edges. "You brought it back to life." Ethan looked at her, then the chair. "Some things are worth saving, even if they're broken." She didn't say anything for a long while, then quietly, "Would you ever work for someone like the company that took your father's land?" He stiffened. "No," he said firmly. "I don't build for people who break things on purpose." Clara nodded, her throat tight. "Good," she said. "That's good." When she left that night, Ethan watched her go, unaware that the woman he was beginning to trust carried the very name that had haunted him all his life. The next week brought a rare warmth to the city. Sunlight through the cracks, children playing hopscotch outside shuttered shops, and a sense that maybe, just maybe, things could grow from broken places. Ethan felt it too, though he didn't say it out loud. Clara had kept coming back not for repairs but for presents. She brought books to leave on his bench. She brought fresh bread once from a bakery he couldn't afford, and more than once she brought silence. The kind that didn't press, didn't fill space, just existed like breath between two people, unafraid of stillness. One afternoon she asked him if he ever made things for himself. "Rarely," he said. I put too much of me into what I make. Can't afford to lose that if it breaks." That answer lingered in Clara's mind long after she left the shop. She sat on the edge of her bed that night, staring at the Grantwell folder on her desk. Her real world waiting like a shadow. She was due back at headquarters in 2 weeks. The board would expect her to resume her duties, to prepare for the eventual transition of power from her father to her. But Clara wasn't ready. She hadn't been ready for years. She had buried herself in libraries and small jobs and hidden apartments just to avoid the weight of the name she carried. And now she had met someone who made her forget it, or remember who she was before it. But secrets rot when kept too long. She feared the day Ethan would know the truth. That day came sooner than expected. A local paper ran a piece titled "Meet the Hidden Heiress of Grantwell Corp., complete with a photograph of Clara at a charity gala 3 years ago. Ethan didn't see it right away, but one of the regulars at the corner coffee stall did. "Hey, isn't this that girl always at your shop?" Ethan took the paper, eyes narrowing. The face was undeniably hers. The name was not. Clara Grant. His chest tightened. His first instinct was denial. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe she had a twin. But the article mentioned her work at a local literacy nonprofit. She had talked about that. The coincidence cracked. Something cold settled into him. Clara arrived at the workshop later that day, carrying a book of poetry and 2 cups of coffee. She saw the paper folded on his workbench before he spoke. "You lied to me," he said, not accusing, just broken. "I didn't lie," she whispered. "I just didn't say everything." "You're a Grant." He said it like the word tasted foul. "The company that destroyed my family. The reason we lost everything." Her eyes welled up, but she didn't move. "I didn't know then. I was 14 when it happened." Ethan stepped back. "And now?" "Now I'm trying to change it. But I didn't know how to tell you without losing you." The silence that followed was heavier than hammers. Ethan looked at the chair she once brought in, now resting like a ghost in the corner. "That thing you said? That I brought it back to life. Was that real or just part of your script?" Clara shook her head. "It was the truest thing I've ever said." He turned away. "Then why does it feel like everything between us was built on a lie?" Clara placed the book gently on the bench. "Because you don't know yet that people can be 2 truths at once. The one they were born into, and the one they're trying to become." Then she walked out, leaving behind coffee, poetry, and a man whose heart no longer knew where it stood. Days passed. Ethan didn't reach out. He didn't reply to the message Clara had sent, just one line, "Please let me explain," without walls between us. But he didn't need walls. He had silence. It curled up around him like sawdust in the corners of the shop, sticky and impossible to clean. Every knock on the door wasn't her. Every glance outside the window found only streetlight and wind. Clara, meanwhile, watched from afar. She didn't try again. She understood. She had always known this day would come. The truth was a blade. No matter how gently you held it, someone bled. But what hurt most was not the anger. Ethan hadn't yelled. He just stepped back. That distance was louder than rage. In her penthouse office at Grantwell headquarters, Clara looked every bit the heiress. Her hair was pinned, her blouse silk, her posture straight. But her eyes were dimmed, like windows with rain permanently etched into the glass. Board members praised her return. Her father, recently recovering from surgery, proudly introduced her as the future of the company. No one knew she spent her nights in a 1-bedroom rental across town, avoiding the suite upstairs that smelled like wealth and detachment. She sat through meetings with property developers, some of them talking about the reclamation of neighborhoods like Ethan's, and she said nothing. Not yet. She had to wait, had to find the right moment to burn the machine from the inside out. Ethan, back in his workshop, found himself unable to concentrate. He'd start carving a table leg and find his hands drifting. He'd sand a piece of mahogany and suddenly see her face, the way she smiled when he taught her about grain direction. One afternoon he found the poetry book she'd left behind. He opened it, and out fell a photo. A young Clara, maybe 10, sitting beside an older man with silver hair, both smiling. The caption on the back read, "He taught me to read with this book. I've never stopped." Ethan held it in his hand for a long time. There were stories here he hadn't heard, layers beneath the name he hated, but he wasn't sure if that changed anything. Then came the eviction notice. Hand-delivered, official. The building his shop occupied, along with the entire block, was slated for demolition. Grantwell-owned property, 60 days. No negotiation. He stared at the paper until the words blurred. So this was it. The slow crush. The cycle repeating itself. That night he didn't go home. He sat in the back of his shop, bottle in hand, not drunk but numb. Everything he'd rebuilt since his father's death, every beam, every story etched into wood, was going to be dust. Again. And the woman he had led into that sanctuary was a Grant. He didn't know whether to grieve her or the illusion of who he thought she was. But Clara found out. A junior project manager let it slip during a Friday briefing. The old artisan row, including Cole Woodworks, comes down in Q2. She stood up. Who approved that? Silence. Her father's assistant blinked. It was part of the legacy plan, scheduled before your return. Clara walked out. That evening she stood in front of Ethan's workshop. Lights off, door locked. She placed her palm on the glass and whispered, "I never wanted this." Then, determined, she opened her phone, dialed her father directly, and said, "If that demolition happens, I walk, and I take every charitable tie we've built with me." She had no idea if she could stop it, but for the first time, she was no longer hiding behind her name. The city moved on as if nothing had happened. But inside Ethan, something had cracked wide open. He packed up pieces of his shop one by one, not because he gave up, but because he didn't know what else to do. There was no war he could fight without knowing if the enemy wore the face of the woman he once trusted. Then came the letter. Thick cardstock. Gold seal. Grantwell Foundation requests your presence at the 20th Annual Community Arts Gala, honoring contributions to local craftsmanship. Ethan stared at it for minutes. He hadn't submitted anything. He hadn't asked for recognition, and yet her name was scrawled at the bottom, Clara Grant. He almost didn't go. But something about the way she had disappeared, the silence that came not from pride but from exhaustion, made him wonder, maybe this wasn't a show. Maybe she needed him to see something. The night of the gala, Ethan arrived late, wearing his best, which was modest, clean, and wrinkled in the wrong places. The venue shimmered in light and orchestral music. People smiled with champagne teeth. He felt like driftwood in a sea of yachts. But then, on the far side of the room, he saw her, Clara, in deep navy, hair pinned like he'd seen only once before, face unreadable under layers of elegance and history. Their eyes met. Hers said, "Thank you for coming." His said, "This better be worth it." An announcer took the stage. "Tonight, we honor an individual whose quiet hands have shaped not just wood but memory. His craft preserves the soul of our neighborhoods." Clara stepped up next, holding a plaque. "When I first met Ethan Cole," she said, voice steady, "I didn't tell him who I was. Because I was ashamed, not of my name, but of what it had done." A hush fell over the crowd. My father's company destroyed homes. It erased stories, including his. I didn't know until too late. And by then I had already fallen for the way he saw the world, for the things he repaired, not just in wood, but in me. Ethan stood frozen at the back of the hall. People turned to glance. Whispers sparked like matches. He wanted to leave, but something in her voice held him there, like nails anchoring a beam. "I don't ask forgiveness," Clara continued. "That's not mine to claim. But I ask for truth, for a new way forward, where inheritance is not a chain, but a chisel to carve something better." She turned toward him, eyes bright under the lights. "Ethan, if you're here, I hope you know none of this means anything if you're not part of it." She placed the plaque on the podium, stepped down, and left the stage. Applause followed, but Ethan heard only his own heartbeat. He didn't walk up. He didn't make a speech. Instead, he stepped outside into the cold air, lungs aching. A minute later, footsteps followed. Clara. She didn't speak. She just stood beside him, like she had that day in the rain. Finally, Ethan said, "You knew this might not work." "I did," she whispered. "But I couldn't keep hiding." He looked at her, not the dress, not the name, but her. "You told the truth in a room built on lies. That's more than most ever do." She blinked away something fragile. "So what now?" Ethan exhaled. "Now I go home. I sand a bench. I finish a door frame, and maybe, one day, I build something for someone brave enough to tear everything down just to rebuild it right." Ethan didn't sleep that night. Back in his small apartment above the shop, he sat at his work table, staring at the unfinished frame he'd started weeks ago. Oak, imperfect, slightly crooked. He ran his hands over the grain, as if trying to read something hidden within the wood. Clara's speech replayed in his mind. The honesty, the tremble in her voice when she spoke his name, the way she stood before a crowd and chose truth over legacy. And still, the fracture remained. He had spent his life surviving the weight her name carried. Could he now live with the woman who carried it herself? Could love undo the ruin that name had written into his bones? By morning, the shop door creaked open. Ethan didn't look up at first, but he knew the sound of her footsteps now. Clara entered with a paper bag and a coffee. She set them down gently. "You still take it black, no sugar?" she said softly. He met her eyes, tired but no longer angry. "Why are you here?" he asked. Clara sat across from him. "Because I want you to see who I am when the last name falls away." She handed him a folded letter. "It's my resignation. I stepped down from Grantwell this morning." Ethan unfolded the page slowly. Her name signed at the bottom in ink. A name she was no longer running from, but was choosing to reshape. They walked for hours after that, through the market, down the alley behind the church, past the school he once helped rebuild after a fire. Clara listened as Ethan told her about the benches he restored there, about the father who taught him to sand before he could spell, about the silence that followed after the eviction. "Do you think people like us can rewrite where we come from?" she asked. Ethan shrugged. "Maybe not, but we can choose what grows from it." They ended up at the river's edge, sitting on a broken dock. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, not asking for anything, just being. For the first time, Ethan let himself lean back. 2 weeks passed. Clara disappeared from headlines. Grantwell's stocks dipped. A rival took over leadership. People whispered about scandal, betrayal, and legacy lost, but Clara didn't look back. She used her shares to start a foundation, a real one, investing in housing, community education, and craft revival. Ethan's shop was the first project funded. They didn't call it charity. They called it partnership. Clara refused a desk. She spent most days with Ethan, measuring beams, sanding beside him, handing him tools without needing to be asked. She smiled more, he scowled less. The city noticed. Something was changing. One evening, as they packed up late, Ethan handed her a small box. Inside was a hand-carved plaque. On it, "Some things are worth rebuilding, especially us." Clara blinked hard, then looked up. "Is this your way of saying you forgive me?" Ethan shook his head. "It's my way of saying I believe in you, and I believe in what we're making." She placed her hand over his. "I don't need a future that looks like the past," she whispered, "and I just want one where we build it together." And in the quiet, among the sawdust and soft light, something finally settled. Not erased, but healed. Spring returned to the city not in bursts, but in quiet nudges. Green shoots pushing through sidewalk cracks, warm breezes lifting laundry lines, and soft light lingering longer each day. Ethan's shop, once a space of quiet solitude, had transformed into something else, a place where people gathered. Teenagers came in the afternoons to learn sanding and joinery. Retired craftsmen dropped by with stories and tools. Clara was often there too, sleeves rolled, clipboard in hand, paint on her cheek. The foundation she launched had partnered with 3 neighborhoods already. But the most meaningful project, she said, was still Ethan's, not because of the wood, but because of the people he taught to trust their hands again. One afternoon, Clara brought in a sketch folded into 4. "It's a chair," she said, laying it on the work table. Ethan leaned over, brow lifted. "This is your mother's chair?" Clara smiled. "Not exactly. This one's different. It's for the new community library we're opening next month. I want it placed in the reading nook near the window, and I want you to make it." He ran his fingers over the sketch. Elegant, sturdy, a tribute to memory without copying it. "You could hire a designer," he said quietly. "But I didn't love a designer," she replied. "I loved a man who believes even the broken things can be beautiful again." He started that night. Oak again. This time not reclaimed but chosen. Each curve of the armrest, each angle of the leg was shaped not just with precision but with story. He sanded for hours, Clara beside him reading aloud from a book of essays. Sometimes they didn't speak. Sometimes they laughed at nothing. And on other nights they shared quiet thoughts, her fears of failing, his fears of losing again. But through it all the chair came to life, slowly, lovingly, like a bridge. When he finally set down his tools, the sun had just begun to rise. Clara stood behind him, silent. Then she wrapped her arms around his waist and whispered, "It's more than I imagined." The opening of the library was small but warm. Kids with juice boxes, grandparents in folding chairs, volunteers handing out bookmarks. In the corner, sunlight poured over the chair, new but familiar, like something remembered from a dream. Clara gave a short speech about stories, resilience, and how sometimes the smallest rooms become the safest places. When Ethan stood beside her, someone asked if they were married. Clara laughed. Ethan didn't flinch. He simply took her hand and said, "Not yet, but every day we build something, we get closer." The crowd clapped, not because it was grand, but because it was real. In that moment they were no longer Grant and Cole. They were just Clara and Ethan. That night, back at the shop, Clara sat in the chair for the first time. She closed her eyes, letting the wood support her, cradle her. "I used to think legacy was something you inherited," she murmured. "Now I think maybe it's something you earn." Ethan nodded, pulling up a stool beside her. "And sometimes it's something you choose to give away." She smiled, reached into her bag, and pulled out the original photo of her mother in the old chair. She placed it in a frame beside the new one. 2 lives. 2 timelines. One truth: healing is not erasing what was, but building something beautiful where the break once was. And together, that's exactly what they did.